of the congregation, that I'm an aspirant to ministry. And I thought before I plunged into my topic, I would give you guys just a little brief update on what I've been up to for the past couple of years. The board of this congregation in 2021 voted to sponsor me as an aspirant to ministry, which I am still so blessed by. I was able to achieve that status after I was accepted into divinity school, which was Meadville Lombard Divinity School in Chicago. And I embarked on that journey in the fall of 2021. I gotta learn this mic today. And it was wonderful. I spent a year in school part-time while working my full-time corporate job and co-parenting my kids with my amazing wife. And it was incredibly, it was one of the best years of my life. I learned so much. I also, during that time, started to get the opportunity to preach in other congregations, which is one of the reasons you guys don't see me as much these days as you used to. I've been lucky to preach fairly often in Huntsville and in Murfreesboro, a little bit in Tullahoma, and at Greater Nashville UU. So that's where I've been, and that's what I've been up to. At the end of the summer semester, I came to a change of understanding, which again was an inspiration for today's service, about divinity school and my ability to give time to that and my career that I have to do to sustain my family and my family as well, and decided with the support of my mentors and advisors to pause my studies. I'm still in formation, I'm still an aspirant. We're just gonna do that when we have a little more bandwidth to not run ourselves into the ground. So that's an update on me and where I've been to this congregation who has sponsored me into this place, and I felt it worthy of sharing with all of you. As I mentioned, one of the churches that I've been preaching at fairly frequently over the last couple of years is a small fellowship in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I'm guessing some of you have relationships with some of the members of that congregation. They're absolutely wonderful people. And part of their Sunday tradition is at the end of every sermon, they have a talkback, which means that the person who delivered the sermon walks up to the front. It's a small room, but it's still full of people. So walks up, sits in a chair, and proceeds to answer questions about whatever it is that they just presented to the congregation. I used to make jokes every Sunday when I did that about, like, are you sure? Like, here I go. Like, I would have a running commentary about how nervous I was about going up to sit in the chair. And then suddenly I started to realize I was looking forward to it. These talkback sessions for me became a place where I formed relationship with the congregation, but also where I started to uncover deeper knowings about myself and whatever I had just shared. Whatever I had just shared, preached to that congregation, suddenly I was still growing in that space and learning more because of that conversation. So today's sermon, on top of the change in my trajectory with school, actually sprung up from a seed planted during one of those talkbacks. After a sermon I delivered on getting good with external change, where I ended up in deep reflection, not on my ability to handle unexpected change in my life, but instead on my ability to handle deep inner change, changes in perspective and belief, changes in personal knowing. Changes from seeing things as less absolute to more nuanced, with more opportunities for different truths to take shape. I started thinking about my own journey with the fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism, which is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. From a young age, I have had a tendency, which I believe to be born from my early religious upbringing, just to be clear, to perceive right and wrong on most topics as absolute. All of my adult life, I have found it difficult to grow beyond an all or nothing stance on most things. The baby gets thrown out with the bathwater 100% of the time unless I take a deep breath and try to look on all sides of something new, if it doesn't initially ring the bells of truth or righteousness in my heart. I'll give you an example. Most Sundays when I'm speaking to a congregation, you'll find some hint or flavor of Buddhist philosophy in the ideas that I'm sharing. Discovering Buddhist teaching and the space they give me to exist in liminal space have been life-changing for me. But it took years of inner struggle to finally feel comfortable understanding that I have full permission to part and parcel what I take from the Buddhist teachings. When I first started learning about presence, mindfulness, non-attachment, etc., I began to experience a new sort of inner freedom that I'd never felt before. I started to wonder early on in my study, which was just before I visited this church for the first time, if I might end up wanting to fully identify as a Buddhist, and if I could find a Buddhist community or Sangha to join. My struggle with fully jumping in, however, was with the fact that I did not, nor did I see myself ever being able to hold a belief in reincarnation, right? The belief that when we die, our soul is transmuted to another being, to put it very, very succinctly, and there's a lot more to it, clearly. But in those days, I was pretty hard and fast with my disbelief in any kind of supernatural realm or afterlife. Any belief in an interventionist God or plane of existence outside of the one that I was living in was anathema to me. And it caused me to throw up a hard boundary in an attempt to protect myself from being disingenuous in my belief. This meant that the more that I studied Buddhism, the more I felt like I couldn't identify it because I learned that it held beliefs or teachings that I didn't. And if I were to remain authentic and true to myself, then I had to walk away. That's how I felt. That's what I believed. I feel such sympathy for that person that I was then, that same person who still takes up space within me, who is so concerned about being absolutely truthful that they're willing to walk away from something that gives them peace out of fear of being inauthentic in some way, who worries that they'll come off as deceitful or two-faced somehow. This person who feels like changing their mind is somehow changing their identity or giving up a part of themselves, something that I'd previously held dear. Now, as I mentioned, it was just after my initial struggle over adopting a Buddhist identity that I found my way into a Unitarian Universalist church, this church, for the first time. And I had that oh-so-familiar experience to us of shaking in my Sunday shoes as I entered the sanctuary, taking a seat in one of the pews, and starting to cry almost immediately as soon as the service started. Because I began to recognize very quickly that I may have found a place where all of me was welcome, complicated and tangled up beliefs included. I have always been a person who is terribly resistant to having my beliefs changed. To suddenly let go of a belief or to comfortably declare that I saw something in a new way felt like announcing that I'd been wrong before or that I'd been lazy somehow in my belief prior to this, or to once again bring up that dreaded boogeyman of my inner life to recognizing that I'd been living in some inauthentic way. My search for truth and meaning subsequently came with it a lot of self-judgment, a lot of subconscious requirements to get it right that truly held me back from expanding my mind and my heart, and ultimately claiming more freedom for myself. Maria Popova, author of the book Figuring and publisher of the beautifully enriching literary blog Brain Pickings, describes my resistance and my predicament beautifully in this writing. It's a quote. "The fact that we humans have such a notoriously hard time changing our minds undoubtedly has to do with the notion that human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished, which belies the great robbery of the human experience. By calling ourselves beings, we deny our ever-unfolding becomings. Only in childhood are we afforded the luxury of inhabiting our becoming, but once forced to figure out who we want to be in life, most of us are so anxious about planting that stake of being that we bury alive our active process of becoming." She goes on to say, "The uncomfortable luxury of changing our mind is central to the courage of facing our becoming with our whole being." I love that switch in perspective, from a resistance or fear of changing our mind to identifying the experience as a luxury. We have the freedom to change our minds. To do so is welcome. By doing so, we become our whole selves. We do not lose anything. We gain more. We expand. We find more of ourselves. This isn't something to be feared. This is something to be sought after, something to value, something to celebrate. I believe that it was a combination of discovering Unitarian Universalism, being in discussion with other UUs in our worship committee and my covenant group, along with years of participating in cognitive behavioral therapy, and also probably just age and life experience, that I started to relax this way of holding on to beliefs. Because once I found myself in a community that embraced and encouraged a pluralism of belief, my edges started to soften. And once I found myself presented with more and more ways of doing and being, I began to slowly accept the reality that there is more nuance to most things than there isn't. And that is a very hard lesson for me to learn. As a UU, I am surrounded by people who make spiritual practice out of changing their mind, out of learning something new, and allowing it to transform their thinking. And somehow, magically, that experience has stopped becoming something that I resist on most days, and started being something that I not only enjoy, but something that I seek out. Where I used to hold my beliefs as gospel and require some sort of litmus test around infallibility when it came to accepting a new way of thinking, I now look forward wholeheartedly to having the script flipped on me. I can't remember when this changed for me exactly, but it's true. And now that I recognize this love in myself, I equate it to the unmatched value I place on my own inner freedom. The experience of having something explained to me in a way that shifts my thinking and ultimately my understanding feels like having an itch scratched that I can't reach or soothe in any other way. Instead of being fearful of learning something that will upend my belief, I now sit waiting for it to happen. I call these moments of coming into a new understanding a light switch moment, or as I learned about them when studying acting in college, aha moments. And they now feel more to me like direct experiences with the divine than something to be feared. These are moments where there is a before and there is an after, where I'm walking around carrying a certain perspective or way of believing, and then I experience something that just shifts things for me. And now I have a choice. I can either reject this new idea, however much it excites me, in order to stay true to who I think I am and keep a sense of stasis, or I can say yes to the newfound invitation to something new. I'll give you a somewhat dramatic example. Part of my spiritual journey in life has been about, first, blindly accepting a belief in God as I was taught, to struggling to find that belief within myself throughout years of being in my church of origin, to outright and passionately rejecting any belief in God, to opening my heart to a curious and loving state of there must be, but it's unknowable. That's been my very up and down journey. It's been a wild ride. It's been a shift from no, absolutely not, to I can't deny the possibility, and I'm going to tell you how that happened. For several years, I had felt good and solid about my atheism. I felt comfortable in it, and it carried a deep sense of freedom as well. I was unburdened. I was clear and confident. I enjoyed my way of being very much. On a random morning, several years ago, I was out for a run on the Greenway in my neighborhood, experiencing that lovely cognitive dissonance that comes from parking your car in an urban parking lot and then stepping into the woods right there next to your house. It was early and the weather was pleasantly neutral. The light of the morning was beautiful and golden. I was at that part of a Couch to 5K that I've been starting and stopping for the last 8 years, where my running sprints were now longer than my walking ones, so I felt like really strong and confident again. I'd opted to listen to a podcast that morning instead of music, but the topic or even the voice that was speaking to me, that's been lost. I don't remember what it was. But what I do remember is that as I trotted down that path, all of a sudden I caught something in my vision that kind of startled me. It wasn't anything scary. It was the simplest sight. Like, it was so common that I normally wouldn't have examined it further. But the image stuck in my mind, and it instantly started to try and change me. It was so simple. It was a beam of early morning sunlight hitting a spot on a leaf where a perfectly cherry red ladybug sat with its symmetrically dotted wings. And I don't know why my vision picked up something so small, or why something so ordinary was framed in that moment to seem so spectacular. I don't even think noticing it would have struck anyone else in the way it struck me in that exact moment. But what I saw was a perfectly designed creature in a perfectly serene moment of beauty. And as I trotted past it and saw it in my mind, I had this overwhelming sense of, oh no, there is a God. It was dramatic, for certain. It was completely unexpected. It was unwanted, and I didn't tell anybody about it. I wasn't looking to change my mind about this, the most grand of topics. I wasn't interested in exploring what the existence of such a deity meant for my life, especially in this life I was leading after my exodus from Christianity. But as random as it was an undeniably large moment for me, and my mind's eye couldn't look away. So I had a choice to make. I can remain in my tendency to see things in a black and white way, either align with my thinking before this random moment I took this leap of faith, or I could soften. I could allow for both and. I could stop demanding an absolute truth or a purity of belief. I could allow myself to be open to another possibility. I could change my mind to allow for nuance, new ways of being and understanding, and that space for the not knowing as well. That experience was years ago now, and the miracle of the story for me is that I never landed firmly on the other side of the question. I've been blessed with growth into a place where I hold the not knowing and the tendency towards believing with love and without demanding more from myself. As it stands now, my belief/disbelief in God feels more like a both-and scenario and a trailhead that leads to some unknown and amazing territory that was there for me whenever I decide it's time to walk down it. My past and my still inherent tendency to stand firmly in what I know is very much a part of me, but what I've come to understand and even cherish now is that learning something new and expanding my belief isn't to be feared, as I've said. It isn't a hallmark of inconsistency or a lack of authenticity. Instead, it is something to be looked for, open to, and even sought after. What I hope you will carry with you as you leave today is this. To change one's mind is to remember that we are alive and free. To change our mind is to open our hearts and to draw our circle wider, to include more and more people whose experiences and ways of understanding are different than ours. Beloveds, what I've come to understand is this, and what I hope you will consider is this. To change one's mind is holy. May it be so.